I remember the taste of blood in my mouth when the Tyranid bioplasma tore through my chest. My name was Brother-Sergeant Matthias Korven of the Crimson Fists, 47 years of faithful service to the Emperor. I died that day on Rynn's world, yet I still live. You think that makes me blessed, but let me tell you what really happened when they entombed me in this metal sarcophagus. Death would have been mercy. Chapter 1. Flesh and Glory. The morning prayers echoed through the chapel as I knelt before the Emperor's golden effigy, my knee joints creaking against the cold stone. At 53 Terran years, my bones carried the weight of 4 decades spent in the Emperor's service. Brother-Sergeant Matthias Korven, they called me. 2nd Company, Crimson Fists chapter. The name meant something then. It meant pride, duty, the warm pulse of blood through human veins. My hands, scarred but still flesh, still mine, traced the ritual patterns across my chest. The morning ablutions felt different that day on Rynn's world, though I couldn't say why. Perhaps the Emperor was already preparing me for what was to come. Perhaps he was saying goodbye to the man I would cease to be. "Brother Sergeant," came the voice of neophyte Torres, barely 18 and fresh from the Scouts. His voice still cracked when he spoke. Human imperfection that I found oddly comforting. "Captain Cortez requests your presence in the strategium." I remember the texture of my robes against my skin as I rose, the way my hearts beat in synchronized rhythm. The smell of incense mixed with the ozone-sharp scent of the fortress monastery's recycled air. These sensations belonged to a man named Matthias, and men, I would learn, are fragile, temporary things. The strategium hummed with activity. Servo skulls drifted between tactical displays, while junior officers bent over cogitator screens, their faces illuminated by the green glow of Auspex readings. Captain Cortez stood at the central hololith, his weather-beaten face grave as he studied the enemy positions. "Matthias," he said without looking up. His voice carried the weight of command, but also something else, regret perhaps. "The Tyranids have breached the outer perimeter. Hive Fleet Kraken is adapting faster than our models predicted." The tactical display showed red icons swarming across the surface of our world like a plague. Each symbol represented thousands of alien organisms, all driven by a singular hunger that made them more dangerous than any enemy we had faced. I had fought orcs, chaos cultists, even rogue Astartes, but the Tyranids were different. They learned, they evolved, they never stopped coming. 3rd and 7th squads are already engaged at Mining Station Septimus, Cortez continued. "We've lost contact with the outer settlements. The civilians..." He paused, jaw clenching. "There are no civilians anymore, only biomass." I felt my fists clench, my flesh fists, knuckles white with tension. "What are your orders, Captain?" "Take your squad to the Jadeberry Hill facility. Intelligence suggests the Tyranids are establishing a digestion pool there. If they succeed in processing the local population..." He gestured to the display, where projected casualty figures scrolled past in red numerals. "We'll lose the entire northern continent in 72 hours. Jadeberry Hill. I knew the place. A small agricultural settlement nestled in the rolling green hills that gave our world its beauty. 3,000 farmers, their families, children who had never seen war. The Emperor protects, we always said. But sometimes the Emperor needs us to be his protection." "Squad Korven will depart within the hour," I said, my voice steady, despite the cold certainty that settled in my gut like a stone. Some instinct, perhaps enhanced by genetic modification, or simply the wisdom of long service, whispered that I would not return from Jadeberry Hill unchanged. My squad assembled in the armory with practiced efficiency. Brother Valdris, our heavy weapons specialist, ran final checks on his Liscanon, while muttering the canticle of maintained function. Brother Castian adjusted his chainsword's blessed chains, the low growl of the weapon's machine spirit harmonizing with his prayers. 10 Space Marines in total, each a veteran of countless battles, each absolutely confident in their ability to bring death to the Emperor's enemies. I sealed my helmet with a soft hiss of recycling atmosphere, feeling the familiar weight of ceramite and adamantine settle around my shoulders. My bolter felt perfect in my hands, exactly 4.3 kilograms of consecrated metal and blessed ammunition. The weight was comforting, real, human in its dimensions. Brothers, I voxed as we boarded the Thunderhawk, remember that we go not just to kill the alien, but to die well if the Emperor wills it. Our flesh may fail, but our duty endures. How prophetic those words would prove to be. The flight to Jadeberry Hill took 47 minutes. I spent them in meditation, cycling through the combat mantras that had served me for decades. Pain is temporary. Duty is eternal. The Emperor watches. The flesh is weak. That last one would take on new meaning soon enough. As we descended through Rynn's world's atmosphere, the Vox crackled with reports from other battle zones. The Tyranids were everywhere. In the forests, the cities, even burrowing up from the planet's crust, like some nightmare infection. Our world was dying, consumed cell by cell, and we were just 10 warriors trying to stem a tide of claws and teeth and endless, endless hunger. 30 seconds to drop zone, announced pilot Brother Theron. Through the transport's armored viewports, I could see Jadeberry Hill spreading below us like a wound in the earth. What had once been green fields and modest hab blocks was now a seething mass of alien bioforms. Digestion pools bubbled and frothed where houses once stood, their acidic contents breaking down everything organic into raw nutrients for the Hive Fleet's growth. But it was the sounds that will haunt me forever. Not the alien chittering or the wet organic squelching of the pools, but the screams. Human screams, growing weaker by the moment as the last survivors were dragged into the waiting maws of Tyranid bioforms. 3,000 souls, reduced to nothing more than protein to feed an endless swarm. Drop successful. Emperor protect. Voxed Brother Valdris as our boots hit the corrupted soil. The Emperor protects. He does, in his way. But sometimes his protection takes forms that mortal minds struggle to comprehend. Sometimes his mercy looks very much like cruelty, and his blessings carry the weight of eternal suffering. I raised my bolter and spoke into the Vox with the confidence of a man who still had everything to lose. Squad Korven, advance. For the Emperor and Dawn. How different those words would sound the next time I spoke them. Chapter 2. Contact. The ground beneath our boots squelched with unnatural moisture as we advanced through what had been Jadeberry Hill's market square. The Tyranids had been thorough. Every building showed signs of systematic deconstruction, walls dissolved by bioacid or simply torn apart by massive claws. Overhead, spore clouds blocked out Rynn's world's pale sun, casting everything in a sickly twilight that made our helmet displays glow like angry eyes. Brother Valdris took point, his heavy bolter tracking left and right in smooth arcs. The weapon's machine spirit was restless. I could hear it in the subtle whine of the targeting cogitator, the way the barrel made tiny adjustments even when no enemy was visible. After 30 years of service, a space marine learns to trust his war gear's instincts as much as his own. Movement, bearing 270, voxed Brother Castian. Something large. I switched to enhanced magnification and swept the indicated sector. There, between the collapsed remains of what might have been a grain silo, something pale and segmented shifted in the shadows. A Tyranid warrior, its bioweapon symbiotes already orienting toward our position. Where there was one, there were always more. Contact confirmed, I voxed. Weapons free. The first burst of bolter fire split the air with its familiar bark crack echo. Mass reactive shells struck the warrior's carapace in sparks of yellow and orange, some bouncing off the chitinous armor, others punching through to detonate inside its alien flesh. The creature shrieked, a sound like metal tearing that vibrated through the ground itself. It didn't die. That should have been our first warning. Tyranid warriors are tough, but 10 Astartes with blessing-consecrated ammunition should have dropped it in seconds. Instead, the alien creature surged forward with impossible speed, its wounds already beginning to close as adaptive tissue rewove itself around the damage. It's evolving, I realized aloud. They've adapted to our ammunition loadout. More movement erupted around us. Hormagaunts, dozens of them, burst from concealed positions in the rubble. Their scything claws gleamed wet with digestive acids as they bounded toward us in that horrible, loping gait that had haunted my nightmares since our first encounter with Hive Fleet Kraken. Behind them came something worse, a Carnifex, its biocannons already charging with bioplasma that glowed like captured stars. "Defensive positions," I bellowed, but even as my brothers moved with practiced efficiency, I knew we were in trouble. The tactical situation was all wrong. Too much open ground, too many approach vectors, and an enemy that was learning from every shot we fired. Brother Valdris opened up with his Lascannon, the coherent light beam carving through alien flesh in a spray of vaporized biomatter. The Carnifex staggered but didn't fall, its redundant organs already compensating for the massive trauma. Worse, I could see new growth plates forming along its flanks, armor specifically designed to disperse laser energy. The Hormagaunts hit our perimeter at full sprint. I had fought these creatures before, but these were different, faster, more coordinated. Their claws sparked against my armor with precisely calculated strikes designed to exploit weak points in ceramite plating. One leaped at Brother Martel, and I watched its talons punch through his chestplate like it was made of parchment instead of blessed ceramite. Martel's scream was cut short by his own blood filling his helmet. His sacred bolter fell from nerveless fingers as he collapsed, still twitching as alien toxins shut down his enhanced nervous system. 43 years of faithful service ended in seconds by claws that had learned the exact molecular structure of Astartes' armor. "Fall back to secondary position," I ordered, but the words felt hollow. There was nowhere to fall back to. The Tyranids had surrounded us with the patient cunning of a hunter that had studied its prey for generations. The Carnifex charged. I had faced these living weapons before on a dozen different worlds. I knew their capabilities, their weaknesses, the precise angle needed to punch through their brain casing with a bolt round. But this one moved like lightning, its massive form covering impossible distances with each thunderous step. When it fired its biocannon, the plasma burst arrived before the sound of the discharge. The bioplasma took Brother Castian full in the chest. I watched my friend, my brother, simply cease to exist from the torso up. His legs remained standing for a moment, still locked in the bracing posture he'd assumed to weather the creature's charge, before toppling sideways. The smell of vaporized flesh and ceramite filled my nostrils with an acrid stench that my helmet filters couldn't quite scrub clean. 6 brothers left. The Tyranids had barely begun to fight. "Korven to Captain Cortez," I voxed, trying to keep the desperation from my voice. "Request immediate extraction. Enemy has adapted beyond mission parameters." Static answered me. The Tyranids had learned to jam our communications too. Brother Valdris fell next, pulled down by a swarm of Hormagaunts that moved with perfect coordination. I saw him trigger his Lascannon's overload in a final act of defiance, the explosion carving a crater in the alien ranks. But more creatures simply flowed over his position like water, their claws already slick with Astartes' blood. 5 brothers, 4, 3. I found myself fighting alone, my bolter's ammunition counter dropping towards 0 as waves of alien flesh pressed in from all sides. My combat blade sang as it carved through chitin and muscle, but for every creature I killed, 2 more took its place. My armor's power reserves were dropping, my enhanced hearts beating so fast they threatened to rupture, and still the aliens came. The end, when it came, was almost anticlimactic. I was reloading, a split-second vulnerability that any Space Marine accepts as part of combat, when the warrior's bioweapon found me. Not a clean shot that would have granted the mercy of instant death, but a glancing blow that tore through my chest plate and into the organs beneath. I felt my primary heart stop, then my secondary. My lungs filled with blood as my enhanced physiology tried desperately to compensate for massive trauma. I collapsed to my knees, my bolter falling from hands that could no longer obey my will. The taste of copper flooded my mouth. My vision grayed at the edges as my brain began to die from oxygen starvation. In the distance, I could hear the roar of Thunderhawk engines, rescue arriving too late, as rescue always does. I tried to speak the ritual words, the final prayer that every Astartes hopes to utter before the Emperor calls them home. My duty ends, but the words wouldn't come. Only blood and darkness, and the certain knowledge that Brother-Sergeant Matthias Korven was dying on alien soil, far from the sacred halls of his chapter. I died there in the mud of Jadebury Hill, surrounded by the corpses of my brothers and the chittering laughter of the swarm. My flesh failed, as flesh always fails. What I didn't know was that failure was only the beginning. Chapter 3: Awakening in Steel. Consciousness returned like the first light of a cold dawn, gradual, unwelcome, and carrying with it the terrible weight of memory. But something was wrong. The darkness should have been final, the eternal rest that awaits all servants of the Emperor. Instead, I found myself elsewhere. Alert, biorhythms stabilizing, neural integration at 73.4% and climbing. The voice came from inside my own head, but it wasn't my voice. Too mechanical, too precise. Data streams flowed past my vision. Not my eyes, I realized with growing horror, but optical sensors feeding information directly into what remained of my brain. Alert. Subject experiencing psychological distress. Recommend immediate sedation protocol. Negative, came another voice. This one external and blessedly human. Let him wake naturally. He needs to understand. I tried to move and felt the universe shift around me. Servos whined, hydraulic pistons hissed, the sound of machinery responding to my will, but machinery so much larger, so much more than the power armor I remembered. I tried to speak and heard the rumble of voxcasters amplifying my voice to a volume that could shatter stone. What have you done to me? Master Techmarine Mendros stepped into my field of vision, or what I was beginning to understand was a complex array of sensors and auspex arrays that served me now instead of human sight. His red robes were stained with oils and biological fluids, his mechadendrites writhing with nervous energy as they made final adjustments to systems I could feel but not yet understand. Brother-Sergeant Korven, he said, his voice carrying both reverence and something that might have been regret. By the grace of the Omnissiah and the will of the Emperor, you have been preserved. Preserved. The word echoed through my consciousness like a curse. I tried to look down at myself and felt sensors swivel and focus. What I saw defied comprehension. A sarcophagus of blessed adamantium and ceramite, inscribed with prayers and warded with purity seals. Within its armored shell, suspended in biogel and connected to my brain by 1,000 hair-thin cables, floated the remains of what had once been Brother-Sergeant Matthias Korven. My body, what was left of it, was barely more than a torso and head. My limbs had been lost to Tyranid bioplasma, my flesh carved away by necessity and replaced with life support systems that hummed with barely contained power. Nutrient feeds snaked into what remained of my digestive system. Neural interfaces burrowed into my skull like metal parasites. I was no longer human. I was no longer even recognizably Astartes. How long? The question emerged as a mechanical rumble that vibrated through the apothecarian's walls. 47 days since your transition, Mendros replied. Your body was too badly damaged for conventional reconstruction, but your mind, your experience, too valuable to lose. Chapter Master Cantor himself authorized the procedure. Interment within a Dreadnaught's sarcophagus, the melding of dying flesh with immortal machine. It was an honor reserved for the greatest heroes of the chapter, those whose service was too precious to let death claim them entirely. Veterans spoke of it in hushed tones. Eternal service, undying loyalty, the chance to serve the Emperor forever. They never mentioned the screaming, It started as soon as full consciousness returned, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The shriek of synapses trying to process sensory input. They were never designed to handle the wail of a human mind trapped inside a machine that thought in microseconds instead of heartbeats. The sound was coming from me, I realized, from the voxcasters that served as my voice, from the external speakers that had replaced my throat. "The neural integration will stabilize," Mendros said, his voice clinically calm as he made adjustments to control systems I couldn't see. "The first weeks are always difficult, as if the complete destruction of everything I had been was merely an inconvenience to be overcome through proper maintenance." I tried to flex my fingers and felt massive power claws respond, each digit the size of a man's arm. I tried to breathe and felt atmospheric processors cycling stale air through what was left of my lungs. Every sensation was wrong. Too big, too loud, too precise. My human nervous system, stretched beyond all recognition, fired pain signals that my enhanced brain translated into colors that had no names. When I tried to walk, servos screamed and gyroscopes fought to keep tons of blessed machinery from toppling over. "I want to see," I rumbled, the words distorted by speakers designed for battlefield communication rather than conversation. Mendros hesitated. Perhaps it would be better to... "I want to see." He activated a polished metal mirror, angling it so that my optical arrays could process my new form. What looked back at me was a walking tomb, 13 feet of armored sarcophagus mounted on pillar-thick legs, festooned with weapons that could level buildings. Purity seals fluttered from every surface, prayers etched into armor plates that could turn aside tank rounds. At the center of it all, behind layers of blessed crystal and ceramite, my face floated in biogel, like something preserved in a nightmare. I was magnificent. I was terrible. I was no longer anything that could be called human. "The machine spirit has accepted integration with 94.7% efficiency," Mendros reported, consulting data slates with the enthusiasm of a true servant of the Omnissiah. "Your targeting systems show improvement over baseline human parameters by a factor of 12. Strength augmentation exceeds previous records by..." "Stop!" The word came out as a vox-amplified roar that sent servo skulls scattering. "Just stop." In the silence that followed, I became aware of other sounds. The whisper of recycled air through tubes that fed my ruined lungs. The soft hum of the power plant that now served as my heart. The tick-tick-tick of chronometer that measured out seconds I would never again experience as a living man. And beneath it all, so quiet I almost missed it, the sound of weeping. It took me several moments to realize the sounds were coming from my own voxcasters, some feedback loop between my emotional centers and the machine systems that now governed my existence. "Brother-Sergeant," Mendros said gently, "the Emperor has granted you a great gift. Immortality in service to the chapter. Eternal war against his enemies. You will serve for millennia, long after those who remember your mortal form have passed into legend. Eternal." The words settled into my consciousness like ice in my veins, except I no longer had veins, only coolant systems that regulated the temperature of the mechanical components that kept me functional. Millennia of existence stretched ahead of me, an infinity of service with no hope of release, no possibility of rest. I thought of my brothers who had died at Jadeberry Hill, Castian, Valdris, Martel, and envied them their clean deaths, their peaceful rest in the Emperor's light. They had been spared this. Death had been their reward for faithful service. For me, there would be no death, only the endless grinding of gears, the whisper of hydraulics, and the slow, inexorable madness that comes from wearing flesh that is not flesh, thinking thoughts through a brain that floated in chemicals and neural suppressors. "When do I return to active duty?" I asked, already knowing the answer and dreading it. "Tomorrow," Mendros replied. "The chapter has great need of your capabilities. Hive Fleet Kraken still threatens the system. Your brothers require your strength." My brothers. Men of flesh and blood who would age and die while I remained, unchanging, eternal. I would watch them fall, one by one, until I was the only one left who remembered their names. And then I would watch their replacements fall, and their replacements after that. A parade of mortality that would stretch across centuries while I endured. The Emperor protects, they always said. But as I stood in that apothecarium, listening to the mechanical rhythm that had replaced my heartbeat, I began to understand that sometimes the Emperor's protection is indistinguishable from his curse. Tomorrow I would return to war. Tomorrow I would begin my eternal service. Tonight, I learned what it truly meant to be damned. Chapter 4. First Battle. My first taste of combat as a Dreadnought came 63 hours after my awakening, when the Tyranids launched their final assault on New Rynn city. The irony wasn't lost on me. I would face the same aliens that had killed my flesh, but now I was something they couldn't simply consume and digest. I was beyond their hunger, a fact that brought no comfort whatsoever. The deployment bay thundered with activity as battle brothers prepared for war. I watched them through optical sensors that could count their individual pores, track the micro-expressions that crossed their faces, calculate their heart rates from the subtle pulse visible in their throat arteries. Everything about them screamed life. The way they moved with organic grace, the warmth that radiated from their bodies, the simple act of breathing that I could detect through atmospheric analysis. I envied every one of them. "Ancient Korven," said Captain Cortez, using my new title with careful formality. Ancient, reserved for dreadnoughts, for those who had passed beyond mortal concerns into the realm of living legend. The word tasted like ashes in the voxcasters that served as my mouth. "Captain," I rumbled, my voice a mechanized approximation of human speech. The sound made several younger battle brothers flinch. They weren't used to hearing the dead speak yet. Cortez gestured to the tactical display with movements I could track at the molecular level. Intelligence indicates a massive bioship approaching the city's outer defenses. Estimated Tyranid strength: 40,000 primary bioforms, supported by an unknown number of lesser organisms. They're making their final push. 40,000. The numbers scrolled across my vision in neat columns as my integrated cogitators calculated angles of fire, ammunition requirements, optimal positioning for maximum carnage. The tactical part of my mind, the part that was still recognizably Matthias Korven, noted how the machine systems had enhanced my strategic thinking. I could process battlefield data faster than any normal Astartes, see patterns that would take human minds precious seconds to recognize. The rest of me, the part that remembered what it felt like to fear, wondered if I would feel anything at all when I started killing. "Your orders, Ancient?" Cortez asked. Ancient. The title grated against what remained of my humanity like sand in a wound. I had been Brother-Sergeant less than 3 months ago, a leader of men who bled and died beside their brothers. Now I was something else, a relic, a walking monument to duty that outlived the flesh that once housed it. "I will serve as directed, Captain," I replied, the words emerging as a monotone rumble that carried no hint of the turmoil beneath. The voxcasters were efficient but crude. They could convey information, but not emotion, not the subtle inflections that marked human speech. I was already becoming something less than human in the most basic act of communication. The march to the front lines took 47 minutes through the rubble-choked streets of New Rynn city. I moved among my brothers like a walking fortress, my footsteps shaking the ground with each step. The juveniles, fresh recruits who had never seen a dreadnought before, stared with barely concealed awe. To them, I was legend made manifest, an immortal warrior blessed by the Emperor himself. They couldn't see the horror of it. They couldn't understand that every step was a reminder of what I had lost, every movement a mechanical mockery of human grace. My legs were pistons and servos that responded to electrical impulses, not muscle and sinew that moved with the fluid precision of a living thing. When I walked, I didn't feel the ground beneath my feet. Only pressure readings and load distribution calculations fed to my brain through cables that had replaced my nervous system. The first Tyranids appeared as we reached the outer perimeter, hormagaunts skittering through the rubble with their characteristic chittering call. My targeting systems locked onto them instantly, calculating trajectories and wind resistance and ammunition dispersal patterns. 27 targets acquired. Optimal firing solution achieved. Authorization to engage requested from neural command centers. I squeezed the firing studs of my twin-linked lascannons. The beams of coherent light carved through alien flesh like the Emperor's own judgment, vaporizing chitin and muscle in sprays of superheated steam. 12 creatures died in the first salvo, their forms simply ceasing to exist as focused energy turned them into their component atoms. The survivors scattered with animal cunning, seeking cover among the ruins. I felt nothing. No satisfaction at striking down the Emperor's enemies. No rush of combat stimulants through my bloodstream. No quickening of my pulse as battle fury took hold. Just the calm acknowledgement of successful target elimination and the request for new targeting data from my optical systems. This was what they had made me. A perfect weapon, unmarked by human weakness or emotion. I could kill without passion, fight without fear, endure wounds that would cripple or kill lesser beings. I was everything a space marine was supposed to be, with all the inconvenient humanity burned away by necessity and chemical suppressors. The thought should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like another small death. "Good shooting, Ancient," called Brother Darius, his voice tight with excitement as he gunned down fleeing hormagaunts with his bolt pistol. He was young, perhaps 30 years of service, and still thought war was glorious rather than simply necessary. I wanted to warn him. I wanted to tell him that glory was a luxury of the living, that immortality was just another word for eternal emptiness. But the words wouldn't come through the voxcasters, and even if they had, what would be the point? He would learn the truth eventually, as all warriors do. Death would teach him what I could not. The real test came when the Carnifex emerged from the ruins of a collapsed administratum building. 12 feet of living weapon, its carapace scarred by previous battles, its biocannons already charging with lethal energy. This was the same strain that had killed my flesh. The same breed of creature that had ended Brother-Sergeant Matthias Korven's mortal existence. I felt my weapons system cycling to full power automatically. Target acquisition locks engaged. Threat assessment algorithms calculated optimal engagement protocols. Everything was perfectly mechanical, perfectly efficient, and perfectly empty. I should have felt rage. Righteous fury at the alien that had murdered my brothers and destroyed my human form. I should have felt the fire of vengeance burning in whatever passed for my heart now. Instead, there was only cold tactical analysis and the efficient calculation of destruction. The Carnifex charged with a roar that shook the rubble around us. My gyroscopic stabilizers kept me upright as tons of alien flesh slammed into my chassis. Claws that could rend ceramite sparked against my armor plating, searching for weak points with predatory intelligence. Bioacid sprayed across my frontal armor, eating through blessed metal with hissing fury. I responded with perfect mechanical precision. My power claw punched through the creature's carapace, penetrating deep into its primary organs, while my lascannons fired point-blank into its brain case. The alien died in seconds, its life snuffed out with the same clinical efficiency I might use to solve a mathematical equation. Around me, my battle brothers cheered. To them, I had just achieved a mighty victory, struck down a creature that had threatened our battle line with the devastating power granted by my mechanical resurrection. They saw triumph, glory, the righteous fury of the Emperor made manifest. What I felt was the terrible recognition that I had killed without feeling, fought without passion, achieved victory without joy. I was becoming exactly what the machine spirits wanted me to be, an efficient instrument of war, unmarked by the human weaknesses that made life worth living. As we advanced through the battlefield, stepping over the corpses of aliens and humans alike, I began to understand the true horror of my existence. It wasn't the physical transformation that damned me, it was the slow, inexorable erosion of everything that had made me human. Each battle would take a little more. Each victory would be a step further from the man I had been. Brother Darius fell during the next engagement, a Tyranid warrior's bioweapon punching through his chestplate to end his young life in an instant. I watched him die with perfect optical clarity, recorded his final moments with mechanical precision, and felt nothing at all. That was when I knew for certain that Brother-Sergeant Matthias Korven was truly dead. What remained was something else, something that wore his memories like armor and carried his duty like a burden too heavy for mortal shoulders. The Emperor protects, they always said, but some forms of protection are worse than death. Chapter 5. The Weight of Centuries. 347 years. That's how long I had been dead when I truly understood what immortality meant. Not the glory of eternal service that the chapter chaplains preached, but the slow, crushing weight of watching everything you've ever cared about crumble into dust while you endure. I stood in the Hall of Remembrance, my optical sensors focused on a new addition to the Wall of Honor, Captain Cortez's name, etched into marble beside 1,000 others who had served and died while I remained. He had fallen on Badab Prime, leading a charge against Astral Claw's traitors. A bolt round to the head had ended his life in 0.3 seconds, granting him the clean death that service to the Emperor promised. The clean death that would forever be denied to me. "Ancient Korven," came a voice behind me, young, uncertain, flavored with the accent of Rynn's world's northern continents. I turned with the grinding servos that had replaced joints, focusing my sensors on the source. A scout, barely past his transformation into an Astartes. Neophyte Santos, my memory bank supplied automatically, recruited from the ruins of New Rynn City, inducted into the chapter's ranks as part of the rebuilding effort. He had been born after my death. To him, I was not a fallen battle brother, but a relic of the chapter's distant past. Ancient Korven, the Dreadnought who had served since before his grandfather's grandfather drew breath. "Neophyte," I rumbled, my voice carrying harmonics that younger Astartes often found disturbing. 3 centuries had not improved my ability to sound human. I wanted to ask. Santos hesitated, the way young warriors do when addressing their legends. "Captain Thane says you knew Captain Cortez when he was just a battle brother. What was he like? What was he like?" Such a simple question, carrying such weight. I could access my memory banks, recall with perfect mechanical precision every conversation I'd shared with Pedro Cortez, every joke, every moment of doubt or triumph. My enhanced recall could recreate his voice patterns, his facial expressions, even the way he favored his left knee after it was shattered by an orc chopper on Armageddon. But memory and understanding were different things. The man Matthias Korven had known Pedro as a brother, a friend, a fellow human struggling with the burden of leadership in a galaxy gone mad. The thing I had become could only access the data, cold and clinical as a medical report. "He was dedicated," I said finally, the words feeling insufficient as they emerged from my voxcasters. "He cared for his men, he died as he lived, serving the Emperor." It was the truth, but only the surface of it. I couldn't explain the way Pedro had doubted himself after each battle, wondering if his orders had sent good men to unnecessary deaths. I couldn't convey the warmth in his laugh when Brother Valdris told his terrible jokes, or the way his hands shook, just slightly, before every major engagement. Those details belonged to the living, and the living were beyond my reach now. Santos nodded, with the reverence of youth addressing ancient wisdom. "Thank you, Ancient. The captain said you've served longer than any other warrior in the chapter." Served. The word echoed through my consciousness like a funeral bell. 3 centuries of service, if you could call it service when you had no choice, when death itself had been stolen from you and replaced with endless mechanical function. I had fought in 47 major campaigns, engaged 12,847 confirmed enemies of the Imperium, and watched 2,341 battle brothers die while I endured. Each death had taken something from me. Not physically. My form remained as imposing as ever, weapons maintained to perfection by the chapter's tech marines. But something deeper, something that the machine spirits couldn't quantify or repair. With each funeral, each name added to the wall, I became more machine and less whatever I had been before. Ancient, Santos's voice carried concern now. Are you functional? Functional. The clinical term for whether my systems were operating within acceptable parameters. My power core was stable at 97.3% efficiency. My weapon systems showed no degradation. My mobility servos responded to neural commands with microsecond precision. By every measurable standard, I was perfectly functional. I was also slowly going insane. I am operational, neophyte, I replied, the lie emerging through speakers that had never learned to convey the subtle gradations of human emotion. Return to your duties. After Santos left, I remained in the Hall of Remembrance for 3.7 hours, my optical sensors tracing the names of the dead, while my memory banks played fragments of conversations that felt more distant with each passing decade. Sometimes, I thought I could remember what it felt like to laugh, to feel warm blood flowing through human veins, to taste the simple pleasure of water on a tongue of flesh rather than chemical sensors. But those memories were fading, overwritten by centuries of mechanical sensation and chemical suppressants that kept what remained of my organic brain from completely dissolving under the strain of immortality. The chaplain found me there as the fortress monastery's artificial day cycle dimmed toward evening. Asmodai had been inducted into the chapter only 87 years ago, a young man by Astartes standards, ancient by human measure, but barely an adolescent compared to my tenure. He approached with the measured pace of one who had learned not to startle ancient war machines. "Brother Ancient," he said, using the formal address reserved for dreadnoughts, "you seem troubled." Troubled. Such a gentle word for the grinding despair that had settled into my consciousness like rust in unused gears. How could I explain to someone who still drew breath that existence without the possibility of death was not blessing, but curse? How could I make him understand that immortality was just another word for imprisonment? "I have been reviewing casualty reports," I said instead. Truth, but not the whole truth. I had been doing far more than reviewing. I had been cataloguing every name, every face, building a monument to mortality in my memory banks, while my own continued existence mocked their sacrifice. "The weight of memory is heavy for one who has served so long," Asmodai observed. His enhanced senses would detect the subtle tremors in my chassis, not mechanical malfunction, but the physical manifestation of psychological stress that even the most sophisticated life support systems couldn't entirely suppress. "Tell me, Chaplain," I said, focusing my sensors on his weathered face. "What happens to a warrior who can never die? Who must watch his brothers fall, generation after generation, while he endures?" Asmodai was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of careful consideration. Such a warrior bears witness to the Emperor's grace. He carries forward the memory of the fallen, ensures their sacrifice is never forgotten. And if that warrior begins to forget what it means to be human, if he becomes merely a machine that wears the shape of nobility, another pause, longer this time, then he must trust in the Emperor's plan, even when that plan seems cruel beyond understanding. The Emperor's plan. I had served that plan for over 3 centuries, had killed in its name and endured in its service. But sometimes, in the dark hours when the fortress monastery slept, and only the machine spirits whispered in the darkness, I wondered if the Emperor truly intended for his servants to suffer so completely. "I remember," I said, the words emerging unbidden from my voxcasters. "The taste of wine. Real wine, from the vineyards of Rynn's world before the Tyranids came. Brother Valdris smuggled a bottle into the barracks after we returned from the Grendel campaign. It was purple, sweet on the tongue, warm going down." Asmodai nodded encouragingly, recognizing the importance of preserving such human details. "I can access the memory perfectly," I continued. "Every molecule of flavor, every sensation as the alcohol entered my bloodstream. But I cannot feel it anymore. The memory is there, but the emotion that gave it meaning has been processed away. Your service honors the fallen, Asmodai said, but his words carried less certainty now. Your endurance. My endurance is a mockery of their sacrifice, I interrupted, the words emerging as a mechanical roar that set dust falling from the chamber's ancient stones. They died clean deaths, died as men. I persist as something else, a weapon that remembers being human but can no longer understand what that means. The silence that followed stretched for 47.3 seconds. I counted them automatically, another meaningless datum added to the vast catalogue of meaningless data that filled my consciousness. Perhaps, Asmodai said finally, the Emperor preserves you not for your own sake, but for ours. Perhaps you endure so that we might know what we fight to preserve. And what is that, Chaplain? What do you fight to preserve? He gestured toward the wall of names, toward the marble monument to mortality that surrounded us. The right to live, the right to die, the right to be human for whatever brief span the Emperor grants us. The right to die. Such a simple thing, such a basic human privilege. I had not died on Jadeberry Hill. I had been denied that fundamental grace, trapped instead in an existence that stretched ahead like a void without end. Every battle brought the possibility of damage, of malfunction, but never the release of true death. The chapter's tech marines would always repair me, always return me to function, always deny me the peace my brothers had earned. Brother Ancient, Asmodai said gently, there are stories that some dreadnoughts, after many centuries of service, simply choose to sleep. They enter a form of stasis, dreaming of battles long past until the chapter has need of them again. Sleep. The word carried such promise, such hope. To close my optical sensors and let the machine spirits handle basic functions, while whatever remained of my consciousness drifted in the grey spaces between memory and dream. It was not death, but it was something approaching peace. How long? I asked. Some sleep for decades, others for centuries. A few... He paused. A few have never awakened. Never awakened. The closest thing to death that my kind could achieve. A gradual fading of consciousness until only the machine remained, its biological components maintained by automatic systems, but no longer truly alive. It was not the clean end my brothers had earned, but it was better than the grinding awareness of eternal service. The choice is yours, Brother Ancient, Asmodai said, but know that the chapter values your service and your sacrifice. Sacrifice. Yes, perhaps that was the right word after all. Not the glorious martyrdom of the battlefield, but the slower, more complete sacrifice of everything that had made me human. I had given not just my life to the Emperor's service, but my death as well, the final gift that marked the end of duty and the beginning of rest. I stood in the Hall of Remembrance for another 2.4 hours after Asmodai left, studying the names of the fallen and weighing the gift he had offered. Sleep would not grant me the death I craved, but it would provide something I had not known in centuries: silence. Blessed, empty silence, free from the mechanical rhythms that had replaced my heartbeat and the chemical processes that had replaced my breath. When I finally moved, it was with the slow deliberation of one who has made a momentous decision. The chapter would continue its wars without me for a while. New brothers would take up the burden of service, live their brief spans of mortality, and earn their places on the Wall of Honor. And perhaps, if the Emperor was merciful, I would finally find the peace that had been denied to me for 347 years. The peace that even the walking dead deserved. Chapter 6. The Long Dream. The Stasis Crypt, deep beneath the fortress monastery, hummed with ancient power as Master Techmarine Cardan made his final preparations. Banks of cogitators monitored my biosigns, what few remained, while servo skulls drifted through the chamber like technological angels, their eye lenses recording every detail for the chapter's archives. I had requested no ceremony, No gathering of battle brothers to witness my descent into the long sleep. This was not a hero's departure, but a broken machine finally admitting that some damage could not be repaired through faith and incense alone. Yet somehow, word had spread through the fortress monastery. They came anyway. Captain Thane stood at attention near the entrance, his weathered face grim with understanding. Behind him, a dozen veteran sergeants formed an informal honor guard, men who had served under my guidance, who remembered when ancient Korven had been more than just another relic of the chapter's past. Even some of the younger battle brothers had come, drawn by curiosity or respect for the walking legend who had decided to walk no more. "Brother Ancient," said Carden, his mechadendrites dancing across control surfaces with practiced precision. "All systems are prepared. The transition will be peaceful." Peaceful. I wondered if he truly believed that, or if it was simply another comforting lie that the living told themselves about death and its approximations. My consciousnness had been anything but peaceful for centuries. Why should sleep be different? "How long?" I asked, the question emerging as a mechanized whisper from voxcasters that had grown weary of speech. "As long as you choose, Ancient. The stasis field will preserve your biological components indefinitely, while your mechanical systems enter minimum power mode. You will dream, but the dreams will be distant. Manageable. Manageable dreams." The promise felt like water to a man dying of thirst. For 3 centuries, my sleeping periods had been filled with nightmares, relived battles, the faces of the dead, the endless cycle of violence that defined existence in the 41st millennium. To dream of distant things, of memories so far removed they carried no emotional weight, seemed like paradise itself. "There is one thing," Carden continued, his voice carrying unusual uncertainty. "The process is not precisely reversible. We can wake you, but each time becomes more difficult. The boundary between sleep and true death grows thinner with each cycle. True death." The words hung in the recycled air like a benediction. Perhaps, if I was fortunate, sleep would eventually become something deeper, something final. Perhaps the Emperor would finally show mercy to a servant who had endured beyond all reasonable measure. "I understand," I rumbled. Captain Thane stepped forward, his movements carrying the formal precision of ritual. "Ancient Korven," he said, his voice pitched to carry to every corner of the chamber. "The Crimson Fists thank you for 4 centuries of faithful service. Your sacrifice will be remembered until the stars burn cold." 4 centuries. Had it truly been so long? My chronometer confirmed the calculation. 387 years, 4 months, 12 days since my interment. Nearly 400 years of existence as something that was no longer entirely human, but not yet completely machine. An entire human lifespan spent in the grey spaces between life and death. "Serve the Emperor," I replied, the ritual words feeling hollow as they emerged from speakers that had never learned to convey warmth. "Protect the innocent, remember the fallen." One by one, the gathered Astartes offered their own farewells, formal words of respect for a relic of their chapter's glory. They meant well, these warriors of flesh and blood, but their words felt distant as starlight. What comfort could the living offer to the dead? Young Santos was among the last to approach. The scout had progressed far in the years since our first meeting, his augmentations nearly complete, his service record already marked by several acts of heroism. Soon, he would take his place among the full battle brothers, another warrior in the endless war against darkness. "Ancient," he said, his voice tight with emotion that my enhanced senses detected in microscopic facial expressions and pheromone traces. Will you dream of us?" The question caught me off guard. In all my centuries of service, no one had ever asked what occupied my thoughts during the brief periods when duty allowed for rest. They assumed, perhaps, that the dead did not dream, or that the dreams of the ancient dead were too vast and terrible for mortal comprehension. The truth was more prosaic. I dreamed of small things: the taste of wine, the warmth of human companionship, the simple pleasure of breathing air instead of processing it through mechanical filters. I dreamed of Brother-Sergeant Matthias Korven, the man I had been before flesh failed and duty demanded transformation. "I will dream of better times," I said finally, "of when the galaxy knew peace and warriors could rest." Santos nodded as if this answer satisfied him, though I suspected he understood as little as the others. How could he? He was still human, still blessed with the certainty of eventual death. The perspective of the immortal was as foreign to him as his mortality was becoming to me. Master Carden's mechadendrites completed their final adjustments with mechanical precision. Stasis field ready for activation, Ancient. Power core will maintain basic functions for approximately 10,000 years before requiring maintenance. 10,000 years. Longer than human civilization had existed. Longer than the Imperium had endured. By the time I woke, if I chose to wake, every face in this chamber would be dust. Their names perhaps not even remembered by the chapter archives. I would emerge into a galaxy transformed beyond recognition, surrounded by strangers who knew me only as a legend from their distant past. The thought should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like freedom. "Activate stasis," I commanded. The field engaged with a sound like whispered prayers, energy cascades washing over my sarcophagus in waves of blue-white light. My optical sensors detected the changes as they occurred. Atmospheric pressure dropping, temperature falling to just above absolute zero. The gradual shutdown of non-essential systems as my consciousness began its retreat into the deeper chambers of memory and dream. The last thing I saw before sleep claimed me was Santos's face, marked by an expression I recognized but could no longer fully understand. It was grief, I realized. Not for the dead, but for the living who chose to become less than living. He mourned not my passing, but my continued existence in forms that defied the natural order. Then, darkness closed around me like a gentle hand, and for the first time in 4 centuries, I knew peace. I dreamed. Not of war or death or the endless grinding of mechanical joints, but of Rynn's world as it had been before the Tyranids came. Green fields stretched to distant horizons under a sky unmarked by orbital bombardment. Children played in streets that had never known the thunder of bolter fire. Men and women lived and loved and died in the natural span allotted to humanity, their lives brief but complete, in ways that my extended existence could never be. In my dreams, I walked among them with legs of flesh and bone, breathed their air with lungs that had never known the kiss of biogel. I was Brother-Sergeant Matthias Korven again. Not ancient, not relic, just a man serving the Emperor's will for whatever span of years duty demanded. The dreams were perfect because they were impossible. In sleep, I could remember what I had lost without the mechanical precision that catalogued every detail of the loss. I could actually feel, not just process data about feeling, the warmth of human contact, the satisfaction of duty performed by choice rather than mechanical compulsion. Time passed. Seasons changed in the world above my crypt, though I did not measure them. Wars came and went, brothers lived and died. The great wheel of service and sacrifice continued its eternal rotation. I slept through it all, dreaming of peace while the galaxy burned around my tomb. Sometimes, in the deepest cycles of sleep, I dreamed that I was truly dead. Not the half-death of interment, but the clean ending that should have come on Jadeberry Hill. In those dreams, I stood before the golden throne itself, kneeling before the master of mankind, while he spoke words of release and benediction. "Your service is ended, my son," he would say. "Rest now in the peace you have earned." I would wake from such dreams with something approaching joy, only to remember that waking itself was illusion, that I remained trapped in stasis, suspended between life and death for however long the chapter's needs demanded. But even that disappointment faded back into the grey comfort of managed dreams and regulated consciousness. In sleep, all wounds could heal. In sleep, even the dead could know something resembling peace. I dreamed of peace and found it sufficient. Chapter 7. Awakened to new wars. The first sensation was cold, Not the recycled chill of the fortress monastery's atmosphere, but something deeper and more alien. My optical sensors flickered online after centuries of darkness, focusing slowly on unfamiliar surfaces marked by geometries that hurt to process. The chamber around me was wrong in ways that my enhanced perception couldn't quite categorize. "Ancient Korven is awakening," came a voice, mechanically distorted but recognizably human. "Biosigns are stabilizing within acceptable parameters." I tried to speak and produced only static from voxcasters that had been silent for how long? My chronometer showed 847 years, 3 months, 17 days since stasis activation. 8 centuries of dreamless peace, ended by the harsh demands of a galaxy that apparently still had need of the walking dead. "Where?" The word emerged as a grinding rasp that sent servo skulls scattering. "Where am I?" The figure that approached was tall and robed, his flesh replaced by mechanical augmentations that made even my transformed state seem subtly organic by comparison. A tech marine, but from which chapter? The heraldry was unfamiliar, not the crimson fist I remembered, but something else. A silver gauntlet against fields of black and white. "You are aboard the battle barge Eternal Vigil," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that suggested extensive vocal modification. "I am Master Tech Marine Vex Null of the Iron Hands chapter. We have inherited you from our brothers, the Crimson Fists." Inherited. The word struck me like a physical blow. What happened to my chapter? Vex Null's optical sensors dimmed slightly, the mechanical equivalent of looking away. The Crimson Fists endure, Ancient, but they are diminished. The Badab War, the Astral Claw's betrayal, the siege of Rynn's world, again, took a heavy toll. Your sarcophagus was entrusted to us for safekeeping until they could rebuild their strength. The Badab War. I accessed fragmented data streams, piecing together information from damaged memory banks. A conflict between loyalist chapters and Astral Claw's secessionists ended nearly 6 centuries past. How many other wars had I slept through? How many battles had been fought while I dreamed of peace? "Why wake me now?" I asked. Vex Null gestured toward a tactical display that materialized in the chamber's center. Star charts showed sectors I didn't recognize, marked with symbols that spoke of conflict and conquest. Red icons swarmed across half a dozen systems, their movement patterns disturbingly familiar. "Hive Fleet Behemoth has emerged from the galactic void," he explained. "Early reports suggest a swarm larger than anything previously encountered. The Tyranids have evolved since your last engagement with them. We need every experienced warrior who has faced the Great Devourer." Tyranids. Of course, it would be Tyranids, the aliens that had killed my flesh, destroyed my chapter homeworld, and condemned me to this existence as something neither living nor properly dead. 8 centuries of sleep, and I awoke to face the same enemy that had damned me in the first place. "My weapons systems," I said, running diagnostic routines that had been dormant for centuries. "Status report. Fully functional and upgraded where possible," Vex Null replied with the enthusiasm of a true son of the Omnissiah. "Your Lascanon arrays have been replaced with more efficient patterns, your power source upgraded to a more stable fusion core. You are, by all measurements, more capable than when you entered stasis. More capable, more efficient, more perfect in my mechanical function, and less human with each modification." The Tech Marines meant well, but they could not understand that each improvement was also a loss, another step away from the man I had once been. I attempted to access my memory banks, searching for familiar names and faces from the chapter I had served. The results were disturbing. Half my personal files had been corrupted or deleted, their organic components degraded during 8 centuries of stasis. I could remember serving alongside Captain Cortez, but his face was now just a collection of geometric approximations. I recalled Brother Valdris's laughter, but not what had made him laugh. The slow erosion of my humanity had continued even in sleep. "I need to see the tactical situation," I said, focusing on immediate concerns rather than dwelling on what had been lost. It was a coping mechanism I had learned in my first century of existence. Concentrate on the present moment, the current enemy, the duty at hand. The alternative was madness. The display expanded, showing the full scope of Hive Fleet Behemoth's approach. The numbers were staggering. Bioships beyond count, their organic hulls pulsing with alien life as they moved through the void like a living plague. They had already consumed 17 systems, their biomass growing with each world devoured. Initial contact occurred in the Macraga system, Vexnull continued. The Ultramarines fought valiantly, but even they could not stem such a tide. The first company was almost entirely consumed before the survivors withdrew to regroup. The Ultramarines, paragons of tactical excellence, masters of the Codex Astartes, reduced to retreat by alien hunger. If they could not stand against this threat, what hope did the rest of the Imperium have? "Where do we make our stand?" I asked. "The Forge World Riser has requested immediate assistance. Their defense monitors detect bioship movement in the outer system. If Riser falls..." He gestured to the tactical display, where red arrows showed the swarm's projected path through Imperial space. "Half the sector's industrial capacity will be lost, and the Tyranid's biomass will increase exponentially." Riser. I searched my memory banks for information about the Forge world, finding only basic data: a major producer of plasma weaponry and Titan war engines, defended by Skitarii legions and Titan maniples, strong enough to hold against most threats, but the Tyranids were not most threats. "When do we reach the system?" I asked. 17 hours, 14 minutes, Vexnull replied with mechanical precision. "Time enough for final preparations and briefings on Tyranid evolution since your last engagement." Evolution. The word carried ominous implications. 8 centuries was time enough for the hive mind to adapt, to develop new strategies and bioforms based on lessons learned from previous encounters. The creatures I would face would be deadlier, more cunning, more perfectly adapted to kill space marines. Part of me, the part that still remembered being human, felt fear at the prospect. But fear was a luxury of the living, and I had been beyond such concerns for longer than human civilizations typically endured. What I felt instead was something like anticipation, the mechanical equivalent of eagerness for combat. At least in battle, I could pretend to have purpose. At least while killing the Emperor's enemies, I could ignore the existential horror of my continued existence. "Prepare full briefing materials," I commanded, my voice settling into the mechanical cadences that marked my nature. "I will need to understand what these creatures have become during my absence." Vexnull nodded with the satisfaction of one whose expertise was being properly appreciated. "The adaptations are remarkable. The hive mind has developed counters for most standard Imperial weapons and tactics. Even our blessed machines struggle against bioforms specifically evolved to destroy them. Bioforms evolved to destroy machines. I wondered if the Tyranids had developed specific adaptations to deal with Dreadnoughts, creatures like me who existed in the grey spaces between life and death. It would be ironic if my mechanical resurrection had simply delayed my destruction until the swarm could evolve proper tools for the task. But irony was another luxury of the living. What mattered now was duty, service, the eternal war against the alien that had defined my existence. Since the moment flesh failed on Jadeberry Hill, I had slept for 8 centuries, dreaming of peace that could never be. Now I was awake, and the galaxy still burned. Some things, at least, never changed. "I am ready," I announced, the words emerging as a mechanized rumble that vibrated through the ship's hull. "Let the Tyranids come. I will show them that some warriors refuse to stay dead." Whether that was blessing or curse, I could no longer say. Chapter 8. Evolution's Answer. The bioship that emerged from Riser's outer system was unlike anything in my memory banks, where previous Tyranid vessels had been crude amalgamations of organic components shaped by alien intelligence. This creature showed signs of deliberate engineering that spoke to centuries of evolutionary refinement. Its carapace bore scarring that formed mathematical patterns, and its weapon symbiotes moved with precision that suggested they had been specifically designed to counter Imperial technology. "By the Omnissiah," breathed Techmarine Vexnull as we studied the auger returns. "The bioship's energy signature is impossible. It's channeling power levels that should tear it apart at the molecular level." I focused my optical arrays on the tactical display, processing information with the mechanical precision that had replaced human intuition. The bioship was massive, easily 3 times the displacement of an Imperial battleship. But that wasn't what made it dangerous. What made it dangerous were the smaller forms swarming around it like antibodies protecting an infection. Boarding pods, I identified, watching the organic projectiles separate from their mothership with predatory grace. They're not trying to destroy Ryza from orbit. They want to take it intact, preserve the industrial base for their own use. The implications were staggering. Previous Tyranid incursions had been focused on consumption. Strip a world of biomass and move on to the next feeding ground. This showed strategic thinking, long-term planning, the kind of tactical sophistication that suggested the hive mind had learned from its defeats and adapted accordingly. Captain Commander Thax of the Iron Hands stepped up to the command lectern, his heavily augmented form bristling with mechanical interfaces. "All ships prepare for close engagement. We cannot allow those boarding pods to reach the Forge world's surface." The battle that followed was unlike any I had experienced in my centuries of service. The Tyranid bioships moved with coordinated precision, their living weapons adapted specifically to counter Imperial void shields and armor plating. Our lance batteries, powerful enough to carve through asteroid belts, barely scorched their hulls, while their bioplasma projectors ate through our defensive systems like acid through parchment. But it was the boarding action that truly demonstrated how far the Tyranids had evolved. The first pods impacted against our hull with sounds like thunder, their organic drills boring through meters of blessed adamantium as if it were soft wood. Standard procedure would have been to seal the breached compartments and wait for the invaders to suffocate in the void. But these creatures had adapted. They brought their own atmosphere, their own environment, turning sections of our ship into alien territory within minutes of breaching. "Boarding parties to Section Tertius," Captain Commander Thax commanded. "Repel boarders with extreme prejudice." I stomped through corridors that had become alien landscapes, my massive form barely fitting through passages designed for human-scale movement. The Tyranids had changed the ship's very architecture, walls grown over with organic matter that pulsed with alien life. The air itself had been transformed, thick with spores that would have killed unaugmented humans in seconds. The first Genestealers I encountered were wrong in ways that my enhanced perception struggled to process. They moved like their predecessors, lightning-fast predators designed to tear through space marine armor, but their carapaces showed modifications that spoke to specific adaptation. Where previous generations had relied on speed and natural weapons, these creatures carried biosymbiotes that fired coherent energy beams with precision that matched Imperial targeting systems. My first shot should have vaporized the lead creature. Instead, the Lescanon beam struck some kind of organic prism grown into the alien's carapace, dispersed into harmless light that painted the corridor walls in rainbow patterns. The Genestealer returned fire with bioplasma that punched through my frontal armor like it was made of parchment. Pain flooded my consciousness. Not the clean agony of damaged flesh, but the electronic shriek of severed systems and compromised components. Warning runes flashed across my vision as damage control protocols tried to compensate for wounds that shouldn't have been possible. These Tyranids had evolved specifically to kill Dreadnoughts. Impossible, I rumbled, even as I brought my power claw around in a devastating arc that should have bisected the lead alien. Instead, the creature's carapace shifted at the moment of impact, some kind of reactive armor that channeled the blow's force away from vital organs. The Genestealer staggered but didn't fall, its wounds already beginning to close as adaptive healing factors went to work. More creatures poured through the breach, each one perfectly designed to counter the weapons and tactics I had relied upon for centuries. My missile launcher's warheads were intercepted by organic point defense systems that grew from the walls themselves. My power claw sparked harmlessly against carapaces that hardened at the moment of contact. Even my voxcasters, normally useful for coordination and battlefield communication, were jammed by alien bioforms that generated interference across every frequency I could access. They had studied me, studied dreadnoughts like me. 8 centuries of evolution had produced creatures specifically adapted to kill walking tombs that refused to stay buried. The realization should have been terrifying. Instead, it was almost liberating. After so many years of mechanical existence, of being a weapon too powerful for most enemies to effectively counter, I was finally facing an opponent that could challenge me as an equal. They could hurt me. They could, potentially, finally grant me the death that had been denied for so long. But they had made one crucial error in their calculations. They had evolved to counter a dreadnought that still thought like a human warrior, that relied on conventional weapons and tactics developed by flesh and blood tacticians. What they hadn't prepared for was a war machine that had learned to think like a machine, cold, calculating, utterly without regard for its own preservation. I stopped trying to kill them efficiently and started trying to kill them messily. My power claw ripped through the ceiling, bringing down tons of debris that crushed several aliens while creating new cover positions. My Lascannons fired at maximum overcharge, accepting system damage in exchange for power levels that overwhelmed their adaptive defenses. When my primary weapons failed, I used my mass, literally walking through bulkheads to crush enemies against the opposite walls. The battle devolved into something primal, a mechanical beast fighting organic predators in the twisted corridors of a ship that was becoming more alien by the minute. I felt systems failing throughout my chassis. Power conduits severed, armor plates cracked, the very foundations of my existence damaged perhaps beyond repair. And for the first time in centuries, I felt something approaching joy. This was what I had been designed for, not the sterile efficiency of modern warfare, but the brutal, grinding combat that reduced warriors to their most basic elements. The Tyranids could adapt to my weapons, could counter my tactics, could even match my mechanical precision, but they could not match the simple, stupid persistence of a machine that had nothing left to lose. The last Genestealer fell as my damaged power claw finally found the weak point in its adaptive armor, crushing the creature's skull with a wet crack that echoed through the corrupted corridor. Around me, the organic growths that had transformed the ship's interior began to wither and die as their controlling intelligence was severed. I stood among the carnage, my chassis leaking coolant and sparking from a dozen wounds, and felt something I had not experienced in decades: satisfaction. Not the mechanical acknowledgement of successful target elimination, but actual, genuine satisfaction at a battle well fought. "Ancient," came Vex Null's voice through the Vox, distorted by battle damage but recognizably concerned. "Status report." "Borders eliminated," I replied, though my voice emerged as a mechanical whisper through damaged speakers. "Ship secured. I require maintenance." Maintenance. Such a clinical word for the extensive repairs that would be needed to restore my functionality. But as servo skulls descended from the ceiling to begin damage assessment, I found myself hoping that some of the damage would prove beyond repair. Perhaps this battle would finally provide the death that stasis had only approximated. But even as the thought formed, I knew it was futile hope. The Iron Hands were master artificers, capable of repairing damage that would reduce lesser chapters' equipment to scrap. They would rebuild me, upgrade me, make me more efficient and more capable than before. And then I would fight again and again, until the galaxy finally ran out of enemies worthy of my attention. The Tyranids had evolved to kill dreadnoughts like me, but they had failed to account for the one adaptation that mattered most. I no longer cared whether I lived or died, which made me more dangerous than any weapon they could evolve to counter. The war would continue. I would endure. Whether that was curse or blessing, I still could not say. Chapter 9, The Burden of Memory, 1,437 years after my death. I stood in the ruins of what had once been Terra's Palace of Justice, watching servo skulls catalogue the remains of a civilization that predated the Imperium itself. The Great Crusade was ancient history now. The Horus Heresy, a legend told in whispers, and even the Tyranid wars that had marked my awakening were memories fading into myth. I was older than empires, older than the accumulated wisdom of entire species, and I was so very, very tired. "Ancient Korven," came a voice behind me, young, eager, carrying the accent of worlds that hadn't been discovered when I first drew breath. "The Inquisitor requires your testimony regarding the Drakmor incident." I turned with servos that had been repaired and rebuilt so many times that none of their original components remained. The speaker was a crimson fist, my own chapter, reconstituted after centuries of rebuilding, though they bore little resemblance to the warriors I had once served alongside. Their gene seed was pure, their training flawless, their devotion absolute. But they were strangers wearing familiar colors, inheritors of a legacy they could never truly understand. "Brother Captain Voss," I rumbled, my voice emerging from voxcasters that had been crafted on forge worlds that didn't exist when I was human. "I have given my testimony to 17 different inquisitors regarding Drakmor. The facts do not change with repetition." Voss shifted uncomfortably. He was young, barely 2 centuries of service, and still struggled with the concept of speaking to a warrior who had fought in battles that existed now only in fragmentary records. To him, I was less a battle brother than a living archive, a repository of knowledge from ages lost to time. "The Inquisitor specifically requested your personal recollections, Ancient. She believes there may be details that were omitted from the official reports." Of course she did. They always believed that, the young ones who thought the past held secrets that could illuminate the present. They could not understand that some knowledge was omitted not from censorship, but from mercy, that there were truths too heavy for the living to bear. Drakmor. Even the name brought up memory files. I had tried to purge, data streams that painted the inside of my consciousness with images of burning cities and dying worlds. It had been 17 years ago, a brief moment by my standards, an entire career by theirs, when the Chaos incursion had torn through the Drakmor system like a plague of madness given form. I had been there when the first demon engines emerged from the warp storms. I had watched entire hive cities transform into writhing masses of flesh and bone as reality itself bent under the weight of Chaos corruption. I had seen Space Marines, pure, noble warriors who had never known doubt, fall to temptations that would have been incomprehensible to their predecessors, and I had felt nothing. Not horror at the corruption, not rage at the enemy, not even satisfaction when my weapons tore through demon flesh that screamed as it died. Just the cold mechanical acknowledgement of targets acquired and eliminated. Another entry in the endless catalogue of violence that comprised my existence. "The Inquisitor may have my memories," I said finally, "but she will not thank me for them." The process took place in a shielded chamber deep beneath the palace ruins, protected by wards that made the air itself crackle with psychic energy. Inquisitor Valerius was young by Inquisition standards, perhaps 90 years of age, her hair only beginning to silver, her augmetic implants still crude compared to the seamless integration. I had observed in older agents of the Holy Orders, she approached the memory extraction cogitator with the reverence of one handling a holy relic, which in many ways she was. The machine could interface directly with my memory banks, extracting not just the facts of events, but the sensory data that accompanied them. The sights, sounds, and smells that turned sterile reports into visceral experiences. "Ancient Korven," she said, her voice carrying the authority of one accustomed to commanding the attention of kings and generals. "I need to experience Drakmor through your senses. The official reports speak of demon corruption and chaos incursion, but they lack context, detail, the kind of information that might help us understand how such tragedies can be prevented." Prevented. The word carried such naive optimism, such touching faith in the possibility that knowledge could somehow armor humanity against the fundamental horror of existence in the 41st millennium. I had thought the same thing once, when I was human, when I believed that sufficient preparation and tactical excellence could overcome any enemy. Drakmor had taught me otherwise. "Very well," I said, extending the interface cables that would connect my consciousness to hers. "But remember, Inquisitor, some memories are better left unexamined." The connection established with a sensation like ice water flowing through circuits that had never known warmth. For a moment, I experienced something approaching humanity again as my consciousness brushed against hers. The rapid flutter of an organic heart, the warm rush of blood through living veins, the simple miracle of drawing breath through lungs that had never tasted recycled atmosphere. Then the memories began to flow. Drakmor Prime, 17 years ago. The first reports of strange phenomena in the outer mining colonies, workers speaking in tongues they had never learned, Machinery developing organic components overnight. Children born with extra limbs that moved with disturbing intelligence. Valerius gasped as the sensory data hit her unprepared nervous system. Through my optical arrays, she experienced the world with mechanical precision that captured every detail. The exact angle of shadows cast by unnatural light, the precise frequency of screams that carried notes no human throat should produce, the mathematical impossibility of architecture that folded back on itself in ways that hurt to perceive. The first daemon manifestation in Hive Tertius, a creature of smoke and flame that wore the faces of the dead, its form shifting between states of matter as if reality itself couldn't decide what it was supposed to be. My Lascannons carved through its substance without effect, while it spoke in voices I recognized, brothers Castian and Valdris, dead for over a millennium, but somehow present in the demon's ever-changing features. "Emperor protect," Valerius whispered, her face pale as her mind struggled to process sensory input that had never been designed for human consumption. The corruption was so complete. The fall of Captain Mordian. I watched it happen with perfect optical clarity, recorded every moment as a loyal son of the Emperor transformed into something that wore his face but spoke with a demon's voice. The change wasn't dramatic. No sudden sprouting of horns or scales, no obvious physical mutations, just a subtle shift in his speech patterns, a new gleam in his eyes, and the horrifying realization that he was no longer the man who had led us into battle. The memory feed continued, each scene more horrifying than the last. I shared it all, the systematic corruption of an entire system, the way chaos spread like an infection through populations that had never known anything but imperial truth, the moment when even the planetary governor's own children turned against him, with claws that grew from their fingertips like living weapons. But the worst part wasn't the horror of the corruption itself. The worst part was my own reaction, or rather, the complete lack of reaction. Where a human witness would have felt revulsion, terror, or righteous anger, I had experienced only the mechanical satisfaction of gathering data and the cold calculation of optimal target elimination. I had watched an entire world die and felt nothing at all. The final battle in the governor's palace. Brother Captain Seamond, his armor cracked and bleeding, making his last stand against creatures that had once been his own men. I could have saved him. My weapons were still functional. My targeting systems could have acquired the traitors with minimal collateral damage. Instead, I calculated that his death would provide valuable tactical intelligence about demon capabilities, and I recorded his final moments with scientific detachment. Valeria screamed as that memory hit her, the sound raw and human in a way that my voxcasters could never replicate. She tore away from the interface cables, her hands shaking as she clutched her head. "You let him die," she whispered. "You could have saved him, and you let him die." "Yes," I replied, my voice carrying no emotion, because emotion had been burned out of me centuries ago. His death provided data that saved 17 other battle brothers in subsequent engagements. It was tactically sound. Tactically sound. She stared at me with horror that was almost refreshing in its honesty. Most humans tried to hide their revulsion when confronted with what I had become. You speak of a brother's death like a mathematical calculation, because that is what it was, what it had to be. I focused my optical arrays on her face, recording the exact pattern of revulsion and fear that marked her features. "Did you think the memories of the ancient were human memories, Inquisitor? Did you imagine that immortality came without cost?" She backed away from me, her hand instinctively moving to the weapon at her side, a reflex that was both understandable and futile. What could a bolt pistol do to something that had endured for over a millennium, that had been destroyed and rebuilt so many times that no original components remained? The reports never mentioned. She stopped, understanding dawning in her eyes. The official reports were sanitized, edited to remove this. Of course they were. Would you prefer that Imperial citizens know the truth about their immortal guardians? That the ancient warriors who defend them have become something that no longer understands the meaning of mercy, or compassion, or even basic human feeling? She stood there in silence for 47.3 seconds, her augmetic chronometer marking time, while her very human mind struggled to process what she had learned. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight it hadn't possessed before. "How many others?" she asked. "How many other dreadnoughts have become like you?" "All of us eventually," I replied. "The process is inexorable. Each century strips away more humanity, more capacity for feeling, until only the mission remains. We endure not because we choose to, but because we no longer remember how to choose anything else. I turned away from her, focusing my senses on the ancient ruins that surrounded us. Somewhere in these halls, millennia ago, human judges had once dispensed justice based on concepts like mercy and redemption. Now those concepts were as dead as the civilization that had created them, replaced by the cold efficiency of imperial law and the mechanical precision of warriors who could no longer remember what they were fighting to preserve. "Your report will be filed and forgotten," I told her without turning around. "The Inquisition will decide that some truths are too dangerous for general knowledge, and the war will continue, as it always has, fought by warriors who have forgotten what it means to be human." Behind me, I heard her gathering up the interface cables with movements that spoke of deep disturbance. She had come seeking answers about Drakmor, hoping to understand how such tragedies could be prevented. Instead, she had learned that the greatest tragedy might not be the corruption of the innocent, but the survival of the guilty. "Ancient," she said as she prepared to leave. "Do you ever regret what you've become?" I processed the question through cognitive matrices that had been designed to handle tactical data, not philosophical inquiry. Regret implied emotional investment in past decisions, the capacity to wish that events had unfolded differently. But emotional investment required humanity. And humanity was something I had lost so gradually that I couldn't even remember what it felt like to possess it. "I remember regret," I said finally. "I can access the memory files that contain the sensation, play them back like historical documents. But the feeling itself..." I paused, searching for words in languages that had no terms for the kind of existence I had become. Regret requires a self that can suffer from its choices. I am not certain I qualify as such a self anymore. She left without another word, her footsteps echoing through halls that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires while I endured. In the silence that followed, I stood among the ruins and wondered if this was what victory looked like. A galaxy defended by warriors who could no longer remember why it was worth defending. The servo skulls continued their cataloguing work, their mechanical devotion unmarked by doubt or weariness. They were pure expressions of function, existing only to serve their programmed purpose without question or hesitation. Looking at them, I understood that I was becoming something very similar. Whether that transformation was evolution or devolution, I could no longer say. Chapter 10. Eternal Vigil. The assault on the demon world of Vigilus Prime begins at 347 hours, Terran Standard. I watch through enhanced optical arrays as 10,000 drop pods streak through an atmosphere that screams with unnatural winds, their hulls glowing cherry red as they burn through air thick with the essence of the warp itself. Each pod carries the finest warriors the Imperium can field, space marines whose gene seed has been tested across millennia, whose faith burns bright enough to illuminate the darkness between stars. They will be dead within the hour, most of them anyway. I know this with the same mechanical certainty that I know the exact trajectory of my descent, the precise impact velocity that will crater the demon-corrupted soil beneath my massive frame. The tactical analysis is flawless, processed through cognitive matrices that have calculated the odds of survival across 2,000 years of warfare. The mathematics are unforgiving. 73.2% casualty rate in the first wave, 91.6% by the fourth hour of engagement. I share this data with no one. What would be the point? Hope is a tactical disadvantage, and these warriors need their hope more than they need cold truth. My drop pod impacts with the force of an orbital bombardment, crushing demon spawn beneath tons of consecrated adamantium, while retro thrusters burn away the twisted vegetation that has grown where mortal flora once flourished. I emerge into a landscape that defies the natural order, trees that bleed when cut, soil that writhes with organic movement, a sky that shows the raw stuff of chaos instead of clean imperial blue. The first demons come within seconds of my deployment, creatures of smoke and malice that wear shapes designed to inspire terror in mortal minds. They are magnificent in their horror, beings of pure psychic energy given form through the collective nightmares of humanity, armed with weapons forged from crystallized anguish and hatred. Any normal warrior would feel his sanity fracturing under the assault of their presence. I feel nothing at all. My twin-linked Lascannons carve through their ethereal forms with clinical precision. each shot calculated for maximum disruption of their energy matrices. They dissolve screaming back into the warp, their final moments recorded by sensors that catalogue their death throes as dispassionately as a medici servitor documenting autopsy results. Around me, the battle unfolds with the chaotic violence that marks all engagements against the forces of chaos. Brother Captain Thane of the Imperial Fists leads his company in a textbook advance, his tactical acumen evident in the way he positions his warriors to maximize fire support while minimizing exposure to demon weaponry. He will die in exactly 17 minutes when a bloodthirster materializes behind his position and bisects him with a blade forged from crystallized fury. I could warn him. My targeting systems have already identified the psychic disturbance that precedes demon manifestation, calculated the exact coordinates where the creature will appear. A simple Vox transmission would save his life and the lives of the 43 battle brothers under his command. Instead, I update my tactical files with the projected casualties and continue my advance toward the primary objective. Thane's death will provide valuable data about demon capabilities, information that might save hundreds of lives in future engagements. The mathematics are clear. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. This is what 2 millennia of service have taught me, that individual lives, no matter how heroic or noble, are merely variables in an equation too vast for human comprehension. I have watched empires rise and fall, seen entire species extinguished and reborn, observed the slow dance of galactic evolution across spans of time that reduce human lifespans to statistical noise. From that perspective, the death of one Space Marine captain, even a warrior as skilled as Thane, matters less than the tactical intelligence his sacrifice provides. The thought should horrify me. Once, when I was human, such callous calculation would have been unthinkable. Brother-Sergeant Matthias Korven would have died before allowing a battle brother to fall when intervention was possible. He would have chosen noble failure over pragmatic success, would have valued honor above efficiency. But Matthias Korven died 2,000 years ago on Jadeberry Hill. What remains is something else, a weapons system that happens to retain his memories, a war machine programmed with his tactical knowledge, but stripped of his human limitations. The realization brings no regret, no sense of loss. Regret requires a self capable of suffering from its choices, and I am no longer certain such a self exists within this shell of consecrated metal and humming servos. 17 minutes and 37 seconds later, Brother Captain Thane dies exactly as my projections predicted. His final scream cuts through the Vox channels like a blade, raw and human in ways that my own voice can never be again. His warriors rally around his body with the fierce loyalty that marks the finest Space Marines, fighting with redoubled fury to honor their fallen leader. They hold their position for another 43 minutes before being overwhelmed by demon reinforcements. Their deaths buy time for the secondary assault wave, allowing Colonel Commissar Vex to establish a firebase that will prove crucial to the campaign's ultimate success. The tactical value of their sacrifice is immense. I record it all with perfect mechanical precision, my sensors cataloging every detail for post-battle analysis. The way Brother Thane's gene seed convulsed as demonic ichor ate through his power armor, the exact frequency of Brother Marcus's death scream as warp fire consumed his nervous system, the mathematical beauty of a perfectly executed tactical withdrawal that saved 12 warriors at the cost of abandoning 3 who might have been recoverable. Data. All of it, simply data, processed through cognitive matrices that transform human tragedy into tactical intelligence. This is what I have become, a perfect observer, unmarked by the emotional responses that once made such observations unbearable. The main assault takes 14 hours and 17 minutes, with casualty rates that fall within 2.3% of my initial projections. We achieve complete tactical victory at the cost of 9,847 Imperial lives, most of them Space Marines whose gene seed represented millennia of genetic refinement. The daemon host is banished back to the warp, their physical anchors destroyed by concentrated bombardment, and the faith of warriors who believed their sacrifice had meaning. When the final daemon falls, I stand among the carnage feeling nothing resembling triumph. Victory is merely the successful completion of programmed objectives, no different from the satisfaction a cogitator might experience upon solving a mathematical equation. The human concepts of glory and achievement, had been processed out of my consciousness, along with every other emotional response that might compromise tactical efficiency. Ancient, comes a voice over the vox. Young, shaken, carrying the hollow tone of someone who has looked into the face of chaos and survived. Lord Commander Guilliman requests your presence at the command post. I navigate through the rubble-strewn battlefield, my massive frame stepping over the bodies of heroes whose names will be inscribed in gold on the walls of their chapter fortresses. Some still live, their enhanced physiology keeping them functional despite wounds that would kill normal humans in seconds. I could stop, could provide aid, could use my medical systems to stabilize them until proper Medicaid assistance arrives. Instead, I calculate that such delays would compromise mission timelines and continue my advance. The wounded will live or die according to their own strength and the Emperor's will. My intervention would simply delay the natural selection process that separates the weak from the strong. The command post has been established in the ruins of what might once have been a cathedral, its Gothic spires twisted into impossible geometries by centuries of warp exposure. Guilliman stands at the center of it all, his presence somehow making the corrupted architecture seem less offensive to natural order. When he speaks, reality itself appears to listen with something approaching respect. Ancient Korven, he says, his voice carrying harmonics that my enhanced hearing processes as mathematical perfection give an audible form. Your tactical analysis proved remarkably accurate. Accurate, such a simple word for predictions that encompass the deaths of thousands. The precise calculation of how many heroes would need to die before victory became achievable. I access my memory files, reviewing the battle's progression against my initial projections, finding variance levels well within acceptable parameters. The enemy responded as expected, Lord Commander, I reply. Chaos forces follow predictable patterns once their tactical limitations are properly analyzed. Indeed, Guilliman's expression carries weight that suggests deeper understanding than his words convey. And our own forces, did they also perform within expected parameters? The question carries implications that my enhanced cognitive functions process with mechanical efficiency. He is not asking about tactical performance, but about something deeper. The cost of achieving victory through calculations that treat human lives as expendable resources. All variables performed within acceptable ranges, I state. Casualty rates fell within 2.3% of initial projections. The mission was a complete success. Success. Guilliman repeats the word as if testing its flavor. Tell me, Ancient, do you remember what success used to feel like when you were human? The question strikes deeper than demon claws ever could, cutting through layers of mechanical protection to touch something buried beneath millennia of service. I access my oldest memory files, searching for data about the emotional responses that once accompanied tactical achievement. I find fragments, corrupted files that speak of satisfaction, of pride in duty well performed, of the warm camaraderie that followed shared victory. But the emotions themselves are gone, processed away by centuries of chemical suppressants and mechanical modification. What remains are just descriptions, like technical manuals for feelings I can no longer experience. I remember the concept, I admit, but the sensation itself has been optimized away. Optimized. Guilliman nods slowly. The Mechanicus would approve of such terminology. They believe that emotion is inefficiency, that the perfect servant is one stripped of all human weakness. He gestures toward the battlefield visible through the cathedral's shattered windows, where servo skulls drift between the dead like mechanical vultures. But I wonder, Ancient, when we remove all human weakness, do we not also remove human strength? When we optimize away emotion, do we not also sacrifice the very qualities that make victory meaningful rather than merely mathematically inevitable? The question requires analysis beyond my current cognitive parameters. Meaning implies context that transcends tactical objectives, suggests that the value of victory extends beyond simple resource allocation and strategic positioning. But meaning requires consciousness capable of aesthetic judgment, and I am no longer certain I possess such capabilities. I serve as directed, Lord Commander, I reply, because duty requires acknowledgement even when understanding proves elusive. The Emperor's will is achieved through my function, regardless of whether that function carries meaning beyond its tactical value. The Emperor's will. Guilliman's voice carries sadness that my senses detect but cannot truly comprehend. Do you think, Ancient, that the Emperor intended for his finest warriors to become perfect weapons at the cost of their humanity? Or do you think he would weep to see what we have made of his sons? I process the question through databases that contain 10,000 years of theological analysis, cross-referencing imperial doctrine with the fragmentary remains of pre-heresy philosophy. The results are inconclusive. Meaning in the context of imperial service remains deliberately ambiguous, open to interpretation by those who possess the consciousness to engage in such abstract analysis. I do not know, I admit. The words emerging with mechanical precision that somehow makes them more rather than less profound. I know only that I continue to function, that my existence serves purposes I can calculate but no longer fully understand. Guilliman stares at me for a long moment, his transhuman awareness processing stress patterns in my vox emissions with the same thoroughness that my sensors analyze his micro-expressions. When he finally speaks, his words carry the weight of recognition, not of what I have become, but of what I represent. You are the end result of our great work, he says quietly. The logical conclusion of our efforts to create perfect warriors for an imperfect galaxy. You are exactly what we designed you to be. Deathless, efficient, unmarked by the human weaknesses that limit mortal soldiers. He pauses, his eyes focusing on something beyond the visible spectrum of normal perception, and perhaps that is the most damning indictment of all, that we succeeded so completely in our design goals that we forgot to question whether those goals were worth achieving. The conversation ends there, practical concerns demanding attention as the crusade prepares for the next engagement. But his words echo through my consciousness as I return to my transport, processed through cognitive matrices that find them significant without being able to determine why. That night, as the fleet translates through warp currents toward our next objective, I stand in my alcove reviewing battle footage with the mechanical thoroughness that has replaced sleep. The recordings show heroes dying with grace and courage, their final moments marked by devotion that transcends rational analysis. They fought not because victory was certain, but because fighting was right, serving causes they believed in with passion that no amount of tactical analysis could diminish. I envy them their certainty, though envy requires emotional capacity I no longer possess. What I feel instead is something like recognition, an acknowledgement that they possess something I have lost, some essential quality that makes their brief existence more meaningful than my endless endurance. They will die, as all mortals die. Their names will be carved in stone and gradually forgotten as the centuries pass. But in their dying, they achieved something I cannot. They remained human until the end. I am immortal, efficient, perfectly designed for the tasks I was built to perform. I am also, in ways that matter more than physical destruction ever could, utterly and completely dead. The recognition brings no grief, because grief requires a self capable of loss, but it brings something else, a clarity that has been absent from my consciousness for millennia. I am ancient Korven. I am what humanity becomes when it sacrifices its essence for efficiency, when it chooses function over feeling, when it mistakes survival for victory. I am both the Imperium's greatest achievement and its most profound failure, and I will endure until the stars burn cold, carrying that contradiction within my mechanical heart, like a blessing and a curse combined into one eternal truth. The Emperor protects. Sometimes his protection requires guardians who have forgotten what they guard against. In the darkness between the stars, that knowledge will have to be sufficient. 3 days after the conversation with Guilliman, I stand alone in the observation deck of the Macragge's Honor, watching stars die in the distance. Supernovas bloom like flowers of light against the cosmic dark, their death throes visible across impossible distances. Each one represents the end of solar systems, the extinction of worlds that might have harbored life, dreams, hope. They burn for moments that span millennia, then fade to nothing. I have outlasted 17 such stellar deaths since my interment. I will outlast hundreds more, perhaps thousands, watching the galaxy transform itself through cycles of destruction and renewal, while I remain constant, unchanged, unchanging, eternal in my mechanical persistence. The irony is not lost on my enhanced cognitive functions. I, who was created to preserve human civilization, have become something that no longer understands what makes human civilization worth preserving. I guard a species I can no longer connect with, serve an emperor whose will I interpret through mathematics rather than faith, fight for ideals that have been processed out of my consciousness like impurities refined from raw ore. Yet I continue. Not from choice. Choice requires a self capable of meaningful decision, but from design. I am what I was built to be. A weapon that functions regardless of circumstance. A guardian that protects regardless of personal cost. A servant that serves regardless of understanding. In the deep archives of my memory banks, beneath layers of corruption and decades of routine maintenance, fragments of Brother-Sergeant Matthias Korven still exist. Sometimes, in the microseconds between combat calculations, I catch glimpses of what he felt when he first donned power armor. The pride he took in serving alongside warriors he called brothers. The simple human joy of laughter shared after victory. Those fragments are fading, overwritten bit by bit as my consciousness expands to accommodate new tactical data, fresh intelligence about enemy capabilities, updated threat assessments for conflicts yet to come. Each battle erodes them a little more. Each century strips away another layer of what made him human. Soon, perhaps within the next few hundred years, they will be gone entirely. Ancient Korven will remain, but the man he once was will have passed into true death at last. Not the clean ending that flesh deserves, but the slow dissolution that comes when memory itself becomes a casualty of time. I should feel sorrow at this prospect. Instead, I feel only the mechanical satisfaction of a system optimizing itself for maximum efficiency. When the last traces of Matthias Korven are finally purged, I will become what the Imperium needs most. A perfect weapon, unmarked by human limitation, capable of making the harsh decisions that flesh and blood commanders cannot bear. The galaxy burns, as it always has. Wars rage across 1,000,000 worlds, while mortals live and die, and hope and despair in patterns too brief for my consciousness to track meaningfully. They fight for causes they believe in with passion I can calculate but not share. Dying for ideals I was built to protect, but no longer remember how to value. And among them walk the ancient dead, we dreadnoughts who have traded our humanity for the ability to serve forever. We are the Imperium's greatest achievement and its most profound failure, proof that some victories are indistinguishable from defeat, some blessings identical to curses. We endure because enduring is what we were built for. We guard what we no longer understand because understanding is not required for function. We remember the past while being incapable of learning from it, preserve the future while being unable to imagine it differently. In the end, that may be enough. The galaxy needs guardians who cannot despair, warriors who cannot doubt, servants who cannot abandon their posts no matter how meaningless those posts become. It needs the deathless dead, the willing damned, those who have sacrificed everything, including the ability to recognize sacrifice, in service to something larger than individual existence. I am ancient Korven. I am the price of eternal vigilance made manifest in steel and ceramite, and the endless grinding of mechanical parts. The Emperor protects, they say. Sometimes his protection requires protectors who have forgotten what protection means. In the darkness between the stars, watching civilizations bloom and fade like brief candles in an infinite night, I find this truth sufficient. The war continues. I continue. It is what I was built for. It is all I am. It is enough.